week 7 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few tight ends I will bench this week. The first guy is TJ Hawkinson of the Detroit Lions. People aren't going to bench Hawkinson this week, obviously. He's one of the better tight ends in fantasy football. But this week, I don't like the matchup as well. And if you're going to start him, which 90% of people are, I just don't see a productive ball game out of him this week. So Hawkinson, he hit a dry spell from weeks 3 to week 5 where he only scored 8.20 fantasy points as his best day. And here, week 7, it's a tough matchup at the Los Angeles Rams. And in my opinion, the Rams defense, they're going to zero in on Hawkinson in this game. They're going to make other receivers and offensive players try to beat him on this Lion team. Because Hawkinson, we know he's the vocal point of this Detroit passing game. We know he's a big target at 6'6", in the red zone, in the middle of the field. And this week, I think they're going to try to take him out is Los Angeles and let their wide receivers and Jared Goff try to beat him in different ways. So this week, I see another down game for Hawkinson for the third time in 4 games. The next tight end I would bench this week, C.J. Uzomah of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Uzomah, he's had a bigger role this season with this Bengal team, and he's had a couple good games. I'm not going to lie about that, but this week, on paper, it's a good matchup at Baltimore that gives up the second most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. And I know with a lot of bye weeks, people went out there and picked up Uzomah in 6% of fantasy leagues, but this week, I just don't see him having a good game. And let's be honest, if he hasn't scored touchdowns in the last 2 out of 3 games, his fantasy days weren't going to be good. Week 6 at Detroit, 3 catches, 15 yards, and a touchdown. And in that Week 5 game versus Green Bay, only 2 catches for 16 yards. I think Baltimore here, they're going to give this Cincinnati Bengal offense a tough time moving the football. And I just don't see Uzomah having a good game. And a lot of people are starting him this week in leagues I see. So this week I would bench him if you have better options. And the third and final tight end I will bench this week, Evan Ingram of the New York Giants. So Evan Ingram, the last season and a half here, he just hasn't done much for fantasy owners and the football Giants here. The last couple games for Ingram, Week 4 at the Saints, it's 5 catches, 27 yards. Week 5 at Dallas, 4 catches, 55 yards. And last week versus the Rams, 3 catches, 24 yards. So obviously that's not going to get the job done. And that's not good production for real life and fantasy football. And right here, Week 7, it's a pretty tough matchup versus the Carolina Panthers that give up the 18th least amount of fantasy points to tight ends. So right here, the Panthers, they're a pretty decent defensive unit, in my opinion, even though the last few weeks we've seen Minnesota and the Dallas Cowboys have good ball games versus them. But this Giant offense is nowhere near those 2 offenses I mentioned, in my opinion. So Evan Ingram, once again, in my opinion, another mediocre game, probably 5-6 catches at most, 40 or 50 yards, and that's not really going to get the job done. So that's a few tight ends I will bench here in Week 7 of the fantasy football season.